Imagine watching someone amputate your arm, only to have them to try to stitch it onto your leg, all while you're still conscious. Think of this like a twisted version of Mr. Potato Head, except instead of swapping plastic arms, they're chopping off limbs and trying to stitch them in places they don't belong. But before we jump into the terrifying details, let me give you some background about them. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Terrifying experiment number 6, Germ Warfare, infecting people with anthrax and cholera. Unit 731 was obsessed with biological warfare. They weren't just content with spreading the plague, they also tested anthrax, cholera, and typhoid on prisoners. But they didn't do it in clean lab environments. Oh no, they wanted to see how these diseases work in the field. We're talking real shit over here. So they infected prisoners, watched them suffer, and then performed autopsies to check out the damage. In many cases though, they didn't even wait for the person to die. They would just cut them open while they were still alive to study the progress. Picture this, you are taken as a prisoner infected with anthrax, and instead of getting medical help, they just cut you open while you're still alive just to see how bad the infection is. Yeah, that's what happened to thousands of people. The Japanese Imperial Army even planned to use these biological weapons on the US during World War II, but the war ended before they could unleash their germ warfare horrors. Terrifying experiment number 7, the pregnancy experiments, testing on pregnant women. Women weren't spared from the horrors of Unit 731. In fact, they conducted horrific experiments on pregnant women, often forcibly impregnating them for the sake of research. These women were infected with disease like syphilis and then studied to see how the infection impacted the pregnancy and childbirth. And what about the time that came for baby to be born? Yep, you guessed it right. They would often perform live dissections on both the mother and the child to study the effects of disease on both bodies. Sometimes the experiments were as simple as cutting the baby out to see how far along the infection has progressed. Imagine being a pregnant woman, captured and used as a living incubator for disease experiments, knowing that neither you nor your child were ever going to survive. That's the horror these women face daily. It's like the absolute worst maternity ward ever. Instead of doctors telling you to breathe through contractions, they are more like, let's see what happens if you add a little syphilis to the mix, huh? And if you thought regular childbirth was painful, just wait until they cut you open and study you. Terrifying experiment number 8, the dissections. No anesthesia, just pure pain. Let's start with the absolute worst. Live dissections. Just think about what it would be like knowing that someone was about to slice you open and you would feel everything. That's so cool, right? Well, Unit 731 performed vivisections. That means dissecting people while they were still alive, without anesthesia. Yeah, man. I mean, they would strap prisoners down, cut them open, and study how disease affected the organs in real time. Want to know the really messed up part? These weren't just quick cuts. They wanted to see everything. What happens when you get gangrene? What happens to your heart when you're infected with plague? So they would let the disease run its course and then dissect the prisoners at different stages to see what was going on inside. And who were the unlucky victims? Prisoners of war, mainly Chinese and Russian civilians, who were treated like disposable lab rats. They would scream, writhe in pain, but no one cared. They were just test subjects to the scientists. It was really like having the plague eating you alive from the inside, and on top of that, being cut open so they could watch it happen. Or worse, like going to the doctor and instead of asking how you're feeling, they would just casually open you up like a biology class frog. No anesthesia, no take a deep breath, just straight up horror show. It's like being the worst guest at the dinner party, except you are the main course. Experiment number 9, forced infections, deliberately spreading disease. Ever wonder what happens when someone is deliberately infected with a deadly disease just to see how fast they will die? Shit sounds way too dark to think about it, so if you did think about it, I hate to break it to you, but man, you're a psycho. The enjoying the sound of a fork scratching on a plate type of psycho. Unit 731 didn't just stop at bombing villages or infecting prisoners. Sometimes they would inject people directly with disease like syphilis, plague, and cholera. They would take prisoners, men, women, and even children and inject them with disease. The infected prisoners would be kept in a locked cell, observed for days or weeks as they wasted away, all while the doctors scribbled down their findings. And you thought a trip to the doctor's office was bad? Try going in for an experiment where the whole point is to watch you die a slow, agonizing death. Imagine being injected with a disease, not to be cured, but so someone could watch you suffer for the sake of science. Pretty messed messed up, right? Bro, getting a shot at a doctor's office is bad enough, right? But imagine, instead of a flu vaccine, they're like, here is a little something we call plague. Enjoy. And don't even think about suing, because back then, you weren't even getting out alive. Haha, jokes. Terrifying experiment number 10. Chemical weapons testing. Gas chambers. Finally! Let's talk about gas chambers. Unit 731 tested chemical weapons on live prisoners. Now get this. Think for 2 seconds that you're in a room that's so stinky that you feel like you might die. Multiply that by 100 and add a dash of mustard gas and boom, you're in one of Unit 731's gas chambers. Trust me, you would wish for Febreze, but even that wouldn't help. They would lock people in chambers and release poisonous gas like mustard gas or phosgene to see how long it would take to kill them. These weren't quick deaths either. Some gases caused prolonged suffering, with prisoners choking on their own blood as their lungs filled with fluid. They used these experiments to refine their chemical weapons for potential use in warfare. And the worst part, these prisoners were simply left to die in agony, with no attempts to save them once the gas was released. Imagine being locked in a room, watching the gas fill the air, knowing that every breath is bringing you closer to slow, suffocating death. That's what Unit 731 did to countless people. Yeah, that's just 10 of the most terrifying human experiments conducted by Unit 731. From live dissections to forced infections and gas chambers, the atrocities committed in the name of science are beyond comprehension. If you thought your worst nightmare was bad, it's nothing compared to what these victims endured. These experiments are a dark reminder of what happens when science loses its humanity. And while Unit 731 may be long gone, the scars of what happened, they will be never forgotten, I guess.